Women to Watch is an intimate look into the lives of prominent and influential women leaders from around the world and the challenges they faced on their journey. It's the real story behind her title. Join us every week to hear more stories about women from around the world and in your own communities at womentowatch.net. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another week of Women to Watch. I'm Sue Rocco, and it's so great to be back here with all of you. Joining me in just a moment, my guest this week will be Mori Taheripour. And Mori is a global negotiation expert, and she's also a faculty member at the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania here in Philadelphia. As always, stay with us during the breaks where you'll hear from our watch team of corporate partners, bringing you all kinds of interesting information from their industries. And for all things Women to Watch, you can go to womentowatch.net. That's women, the number 2, watch.net, N-E-T. So now I'm thrilled and honored to welcome to the show, Mori Taheripour. Hi, Mori.
Hi, so happy to see you. So happy to be here.
Terrific. Thank you so much for taking time out of what I know is a very busy schedule for you. I'm thrilled to have you. As always on this show, we start at the very beginning. And I wonder if you could just tell our viewers a little bit about the community you were born in Iran.
Yes, I was, quite young. I was living in Iran. Actually, we came back and forth to the States because my older brother and sister had come over to the United States for their education, so high school, college. And my mom and I would often visit. And so at the brink of the revolution in 78, 79, my parents decided that it was not the place for me to really get my education and sort of grow in a safe environment, safe community. Everything had changed. There was a revolution, a coup d'etat, basically, and all had changed. So we moved to the United States, my mom and I, and joined sort of my sister and my brother. And I have very fond memories, actually, of Iran as a little girl. It was great. We had so many relatives and family. The Iranian culture is very welcoming, very hospitable. Family is more important than anything. So all I have are those memories of growing up in a very loving and very strong sort of community of family. So when we left, my mom and I, and then joined by my father, sort of felt like a big separation in a lot of ways. Joining my sister and my brother was great. But again, there wasn't this whole sort of community behind us. We moved to Lowell, Massachusetts first, then to Brookline, Massachusetts. And I'm actually really grateful for that. It felt like a very safe place. There was a lot of diversity in the community itself. There was actually other Iranians that lived there. And it just felt like the right community to be in. Very strong school system. And more importantly, this incredibly strong sports culture, which is probably the beginning of my love for sports. But it was a community and felt like I'm grateful that that's where we ended up. My sister went to Boston University, so that's how we ended up there. But It was a different community, but it was a community nonetheless.
So when you think back, what was maybe you weren't afraid or scared, but what was the thing that you look back on and think this was the hardest part of doing that, starting over in a completely different country?
Well, it was also right at the sort of the front end of the hostage crisis. And so coming to the US during that time and growing up in that culture I probably a very similar experience sort of in more recent memory is like 9/11. And in a lot of ways there was, it didn't feel that welcoming at first for Iranians because there was really this notion of they're the enemy. They took our people, right? During the hostage crisis, there was that kind of sort of headbutting, and it didn't. My mom, especially, was very sort of guarded in some ways, about me going to school and being Iranian and being safe during that time. And I just remember this notion of it's probably not a good thing to tell people that I'm Iranian.
Hard. Wow, that's hard.
It is, because then you're like, and so who am I? Right. And that was probably the most difficult thing. It's sort of hard to not claim your culture and then integrate into this other culture that at that time wasn't even all that different. Because again, I had visited the US so many times. My English was better than my Farsi because I was going to international school in Iran. But it still feels like the pride that one has for their nationality, just you couldn't really sit in that. And so that was really difficult. I think just trying to find my place and figuring out who I am as a pretty young girl.
Yeah. How old were you when you came?
I think I was about 7 or 8 years old at that time.
Okay. And I think, secrets can create anxiety, particularly for children. If the parents aren't speaking openly and saying, here's what's happening, this is what's going on. So I would imagine your getting involved in sports helped with that.
It did. So I didn't play myself, but I was a little bit of a tomboy anyway. But there was this really that was the day and age where you could actually send your kids out and not be so worried. It was a really pretty tight knit community, so you could stay out till dark and feel really safe. And my mom could look out of the balcony and see us playing in the playground. But so in that sense, playing outside was the thing that people did. It was still not sort of this get on your phones and computers and your iPads and play games as a kid. This was your whole life was outside. And so, and we played, right? So sports can be interpreted in a variety of different ways, but it was running and all these things, right? So that was the one thing. And then Boston itself the sports culture in Boston is unbelievable, right? So it's hard to live there and not be
baseball.
Well, funny thing is, we also lived just a few blocks from Fenway. So you could actually sit on a balcony and look over. And I was like mesmerized by the lights that would go on. It was sports in some ways. And even sort of watching it on TV, the Boston Celtics, I mean, it felt like a respite. Sports was its own community. Fandom was its own community, and it brought people together. So coming from a place where things were basically pulled apart, right? There was factions of people. Here was a really strong community of people that, despite all the differences and the diversity, everybody sort of came together to support these teams.
Yes.
So it felt like sports was really that. It was sort of magical in a lot of ways.
It's just a wonderful distraction from the seriousness of the day to day, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what were you, when you were young, what were you aspiring to be? What did you say, this is what I want to be when I grow up? Because I have a feeling it wasn't a negotiation expert.
It was not. And even in my adult years, it was not. But my aspirations, I didn't feel like I was free to discover. I was told that I should be a doctor from a very, very young age. So that's all my dad wanted. My sister didn't pursue it. My brother didn't pursue it. I was like the last hope. So I grew up knowing that that's the path I was supposed to take. And so there wasn't a whole lot of imagination that I had doing anything else. I remembered I loved fashion. I loved sports. I loved a lot of different things, but that love did not translate into something that I could realistically pursue. So, that became my whole, sort of high school and college career, basically. Like I went through that part of my life thinking, this is what I'm supposed to do, without a whole lot of regard to, but what is it that you really want to do, Mori?
That's very, I would say that's more common. I think in today's world, there's so much more acceptance and conversation around what are you here meant to do, as opposed to here's the career that'll pay the bills.
Yeah, there wasn't this whole like, what is your purpose in life? It was my purpose in life was to pursue somebody else's purpose in life, basically.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely true. It's almost every immigrant story. the doctor, the engineer, the lawyer, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so mine is really not that different, but you still as a child think they've left everything behind for me. So this is the least I could do, is really to pursue their dreams for me.
How did you do academically? Was school, did it come easy for you, or did you have to work really, really hard to get, that A?
At a pretty young age. So like elementary school, I remember was actually not very hard for me, even though the school system was pretty rigorous. The whatever schooling I had in Iran had pretty well prepared me. And that's a very rigorous education system. So I didn't feel, one, there was no language issue because again, I was pretty fluent in English. So that wasn't an issue. And I think even the coursework at that age was not hard for me at all. We moved to New Jersey after that. And I went to public school for a year. That was not hard at all for me. And I wanted more. I felt like there should be something that's challenging me more. So I ended up going to a private school, and I'm like, oh, okay, so this is hard. So it became, it was both exciting in a lot of ways because it was finally sort of capturing my attention. It was another great community where I still have some of my best friends from life from that age. But I was working pretty darn hard. And then there was the whole college application process, which I didn't really have anybody to help me with, certainly not my parents. So that felt like a task that I took on very independently. And that was pretty rigorous. So, it became harder and harder. And then once I went to college and had to sort of take all the coursework that was required for pre-med students, I was like, oh my God, I was like I was just lost. I was in a lot of those classes. I knew that I had to get the better grades because it was such a competitive area to be in, but none of it came easy to me. None of it came easy. And so it was like swimming upstream for about 4 years, actually.
Wow. Yeah, that's so hard. Anything related to science, over my head for sure. So tell me about what was your first job out of school?
So I took I paid for college. So I had jobs from a pretty young age, actually, from babysitting in high school all the way, and before even high school, in elementary school, actually in Boston, all the way through high school and then college. So, things like everything from waitressing to whatever it was that I had to do. And then in school, so I waitressed, and then in school and college, I also took a lot of jobs, paid or unpaid, because I had to sort of work in labs and doctor's offices and really sort of prepare myself for, what I thought was going to be a medical career. And just before my senior year in college, I worked as a sort of internship at St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital in New York. And the first opportunity there was in a sickle cell division. And probably one of the first life-changing experiences, in the sense that the population that was affected by this disease were sort of underserved, had little access, very painful disease. And for those that don't understand it, they really can't envision how hard this is to live with. And so the medications that's necessary to reduce the pain, it was all of that. I learned really quickly about sort of the haves and the have-nots in the healthcare system, and thought it was really sort of unjust. And so just working there and working with the people I worked with, you almost immediately became sort of their biggest advocate and fought for them in every way you could. And then the whole HIV epidemic hit. And so those people who were getting transfusions, blood transfusions, were in the sickle cell unit that we were serving, were also now at risk for HIV. And that was, sort of like that double whammy. And again, at that age, I don't want to say I was naive, but I thought the world could do better. I thought everybody could do better. And so my family had moved to California while I was in college. And I was still in that place of, oh my God, I still have to take the MCATs. I don't know how I'm going to do this. I don't know what I want to do. And so I moved to California to join them because it was sort of like not having a firmly planted sort of plan at that point. So I went to California and decided that what I had just seen in New York was something that I didn't really want to let go of, that I wanted to still play that advocacy role, and ended up in public health. And for several years, ended up working actually in HIV/AIDS, particularly with hard-hit populations and at-risk populations, and life-changing. I mean, that was definitely probably the only way I can describe it. I learned that it wasn't necessarily medicine that I wanted to pursue as a doctor on that very sort of micro level, but I love this notion of fighting for people and educating people who otherwise could go unserved. And ended up working in public health and actually enjoying it, but also understanding that a medical school was not in the cards for me.
But that was okay, right? So you discovered this other area within the healthcare system that you could have impact and make a difference.
Absolutely. And, you hear this all the time. You ask kids what they want to do. Oh, I want to change the world. Oh, I want to affect
Everyone wants to change the
people's
world. It's not
lives.
that easy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I wanted some impact. I wanted to make an impact in one way or another. And that became sort of the thing. And even looking at my career now, it's the thing that is very attractive to me, because I feel like there's a responsibility that we all have, and in whatever form that comes. So you're absolutely right. It was exciting, but part of the reason why it was exciting was it was also hard. And you felt your purpose, my purpose at that time was, again, we can do better as a society. We should do better as a society. We should provide access to people. And I became quite passionate about that. And actually in my book, there's several stories about this, one in particular, but I've learned something from every chapter. And that chapter taught me that I didn't have to be a doctor to do what I wanted to do. There was actually greater impact that I could have being in this sort of area of public health, particularly in HIV/AIDS. And then I actually ended up starting my own company around sort of education and prevention campaigns for hard to reach populations. And that was it. Just talking to you right now, how you become more clear about the direction that you want to go, even though it's not an exact thing, but you learn at every step. And it became clearer and clearer to me that, again, my place in the world should be someplace where I can have impact, that I can change people's lives or affect people's lives. And whether that's, 100 people or whatever it was, but that felt like my calling.
That was where you kind of felt joy, right? When you're doing that. Do you see that is more common with women? So in other words, they come into a situation and they see something that is so blatantly and clearly wrong. I kind of believe this, and we just want to fix it. It's not a question. It's just, okay, how can we fix this problem?
Right. I don't know if I would just make it a gender thing. I think part of our gender role is that we are caregivers, that we are people that through sort of empathy and compassion, we want to effectuate people's lives, especially those people that we care deeply about. So yes, in that way, absolutely. Because I think from a very young age, we take on that role, sort of this selfless, let me fix it, let me risk whatever I need to risk to fix other people's lives. And it's your kids, it's whatever it is. But I don't want to leave sort of men out of that equation either. I think a lot of it has to do with culture. I think a lot of it has to do with passion. I think a lot of it has to do really with the way you see the world. And so if you think about, is this only women? I would say I don't know. I think that I would say it's how people feel, where people feel like their places in the world, and what they can do with that, right? I work with professional athletes. A lot of them go back to their communities and want to invest in their communities. I've worked with, obviously, men and women from sort of all professional ranks all the way down to my Wharton students. And when they have a calling, gender is not really the thing. It's just their passion that sort of drives, and their purpose in the world that drives them.
Which is a good thing.
Which is a good thing.
Which is a really good thing.
You don't want half the population wanting to just help people. So.
I would say we probably, and you're 100% right, we probably come at it from different angles
Right.
and different ways. And I know that you talk about something I want to talk to you specifically about is kind of, this idea around emotional quotient, EQ versus IQ. I think I am so thrilled that the world has discovered that there is another form of intelligence, and how important that is. I would say, particularly with negotiation, which is just people talking and trying to come to a place of agreement or compromise. I watched your podcast with Glennon Doyle. She's just
Amazing.
an amazing person. Her first book changed my life, truly. Love Warrior. I love that book. And she was talking about how it should never be a battle. It shouldn't be a fight when you're negotiating with someone. It should be coming to a third solution, I believe she said. Tell me about that and, what that means and, of course, what she meant by that.
I think what she meant, and, just an aside, that was an unbelievable conversation because it felt so safe. It felt like we were sort of around the kitchen table and having this conversation. So I think definitely my guard was down. I mean, it felt really comfortable and sort of free flowing because I think I was even figuring out things as we were talking. And in the course of that conversation, it became sort of this notion of, first of all, a lot of myth busting around negotiations. And it's not supposed to be headbutting. It's not supposed to be contentious. In fact, the best negotiations are that which allows room for both sides to feel like they're walking away with something that's important to them. And so when you start thinking about it that way, you put on more of a problem-solving hat as opposed to this who's going to win this battle hat. And when it becomes problem-solving, it leaves room for people, right? There's always enough room actually for people if we think about it, right? This world of ours is not scarce. Some of us make it seem that way, but there's great abundance for people, whether it's money, whether it's resources. You just have to be your own best advocate in a lot of ways. It's sort of this notion of deservedness, and then go in with this problem-solving hat that doesn't leave you out of the equation either, but really makes room for both sides. And I think through the course of that conversation, it became very clear. And the gender dynamic also became very clear in that sense, because sort of going back to the earlier question, it's not that men don't want to help. It's just I think we come to problem solving in very different ways. Right. One sort of both sides want to fix things. I think women have more of that sort of empathetic, sort of a collaborative mindset around these things. There's a certain elegance about us in the way we do it. And it's quite nuanced, actually, but it really shows up actually in things like negotiations, because we do put on our sort of gender role hat, and whether we're allowed or not allowed to advocate for ourselves and what that means and how will people judge us for it. And because we're so, like, that takes up so much of the space of our thinking, we don't allow ourselves to be more strategic, to be more thoughtful sometimes about what we want. But instead, it's sort of, how will you be judged? And when that takes up all of your energy, it becomes really hard to think about sort of collaborative problem solving, because you sort of leave yourself out. And I don't think that's true of men. I think that's definitely more of a sort of a gender role that we take on, and societal sort of norms that play in our minds constantly.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to me. And I have many more questions for you on it. We're going to go into our first break. And when we come back, I want to talk about, first I want to know, when did you have this epiphany about, really what your expertise in negotiating, how did you discover that? And we'll talk a little bit about EQ. Stay with us, and we'll be back with Mori Taheripour, and stay with us for our watch team. We'll be right back. to the show. I'm joined this week by Mori Taheripour, and Mori is a faculty member at the Wharton School of Business at the University of Penn, and also a global negotiation expert. My first question: when did you realize that this was a specialty and you were going to do something with it?
I can't say I realized. Because somebody told me that this is maybe what I should consider doing. And teaching was the thing. I was getting ready to graduate business school. And actually the person who was my negotiations professor, I was still thinking, like, what do I do? I had a company at the time. Do I go back and continue to do that? You know, you sort of have been so intellectually stimulated for 2 years that it doesn't feel like you could just go back to life as it was. Like there's something else that feels like you should be doing. And so while I was trying to figure that out, my professor at the time said, "Hey, maybe you should consider teaching." I thought he was nuts, to be honest. I'm an introvert by nature. The thought of even standing in front of a classroom put the fear of God in me. And I was like, why would you ever even think that this is something I could do? And he's like, I saw you in class. I saw how you sort of so enjoyed being in that class and the way you took things on. We do a lot of role play and whatnot. And he said, I just think that there's something you can do. So that's how it all started. It was sort of the seed. And I was still not convinced. I actually became his teaching assistant. So he said, just see it from the other side.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah.
And it was sort of, I would say, love at first sight in a lot of ways. It felt very different from the other side. Again, you felt like you were helping, which now it sort of becomes this continuation of the theme for me. And you take on a different kind of responsibility. This is not about yourself anymore. This is about kind of community in your classroom. And I started teaching sort of immediately after that. That was 2004. More than 18 years later, just about, here I am. Wow. I'm doing something I never, ever imagined. And why negotiations? Again, he thought it was something that was sort of appealing to me in a very different way. And I was an entrepreneur at the time. I had sort of all these experiences that when I felt like I could allow myself to bring that into a classroom, it took a few years for me to give myself permission to be exactly who I wanted to be in the classroom and to feel comfortable. And, you feel very pressured. You feel like these people's lives are in my hands. You are sort of the leader in a lot of ways, and how they're going to see this subject or how they're going to see themselves take part in what I consider now to be maybe the most routine thing that we do in our lives, like every single day. But after a few years, it took about 3 years, and I was like, I wasn't quite enjoying it as much because I felt sort of reined in by my own self, by the way. And
pretending to be a figure that you thought you should be
exactly sticking to the syllabus exactly as it was, like not stepping outside of the lines, and I don't want to make mistakes. And finally I was like, either you're going to enjoy this or this isn't really meant for you. Mm-hmm. And I sort of gave myself permission to do it the way I wanted to do it. And I haven't looked back since. It felt, the classroom became a very different place to me. It came a place, I teach the course very differently. I do a lot of sort of mindset work and self-reflection work. And I come at negotiations at a very sort of more of a psychology of negotiations than anything else. And once I did that, it just felt not only right, but it felt like finally I was seeing my purpose, like that whole notion again of helping, but doing it in a way that felt most comfortable to me. And I became more confident and I fell in love, to be honest with you. This is now sort of a true passion for me. And the more I leaned into my passion, the better I became at teaching. So, here I am. I didn't think, all through my life or adult life, I should teach negotiations. It was sort of, that door was open for me. The opportunity was given to me. And when I said, okay, why not? It all sort of fell into place.
So here's a question I want to ask. It's such an important topic, the topic of going out into the world and allowing ourselves to be truly who we are. I don't know why it's so hard for human beings to do that, but there's manuals everywhere that say this is how it should be done. And I've learned so much, from doing the show over these years. And for me, the self-reflection came first because I deeply wanted to be better, right? And feel comfortable in my own skin. And then all of I just was so learning constantly all the time within interactions. And sometimes people will learn, perhaps, this professor said to you, maybe you should be a teacher, and then you start to self-reflect. Mm-hmm. Which was it first for you? Were you always kind of battling, going out to the world as your full self, who you are? And
absolutely. I think that, again, growing up in a very different culture and being told that this is what you should pursue as your career, you sort of aren't walking in your authenticity that entire time, because you're not almost allowed, either by other people or yourself, to imagine that, to feel like that's the right thing to do. You sort of disallow yourself. And I think that when this sort of, and again, the reins became looser, just because finally when I had the sort of the courage to say, I don't want to be a doctor, that became almost the beginning of my journey, because then it was like, okay, now what? And that sort of takes some self-reflection and courage, quite frankly, to say, I don't know what it is, but I want to find something that I'm passionate about. Because if not that, then what, right? So, and when I started teaching, I think the more I reflected on just even my whole life up until that point, where I was very guarded. Again, the cultural extremes, right? That you had to find your place between these two cultures, and feeling like the sort of traditional culture of my family, the American culture, the more sort of freeing culture, that was what I grew up with. And I don't, quite frankly, think I was ever really myself, all the time, at home or at school, because you still carried this other part of you with you.
Yeah.
And when I started to even loosen those reins, when I thought you sort of can't breathe fully that way. And the more you become yourself, the more it's almost like oxygen that you get. And to be honest with you, the one place that I am most myself, I think, when I'm most authentic, because I've allowed myself to be, is in a classroom. It's where I feel most safe. It's where I feel not judged. It's where we all become really sort of emotionally tied to the classroom and the experience that we're all sharing. And I sort of let go. And I think that's sort of the magic of my classroom, because it's safe. We're vulnerable. We're sort of taking this journey together. And I know to your listeners, this is like, wait, doesn't she teach negotiations? Yes. But we come at it at this place of, we have to always learn. We have to always be open. We have to always feel like, as confident as we are, we have the humility to know you don't know everything, and you can't lead with certainty. That leading with sort of this very curious mindset just continues to make you better and better and better. And I think I come to that, the courage that I have to be myself, I've come to probably in the classroom more than anything else.
Do you talk to your kids the way you and I are talking about this, and how important it is for them in life?
I do.
As a part of teaching the course?
Mm-hmm. Adults, everybody. I mean, that's sort of the scene setting at the beginning of the class. And whether it's executives I'm working with, entrepreneurs, or my students at Wharton, it's all the same. It's like the purpose of the classroom, these next 4 hours or next semester that we have with each other, is going to be probably different than anything you really had perceived this experience to be before you walk through those doors. But I feel like if you can't learn to be exactly who you are, again, with courage and purpose, and allow yourself to advocate for yourself and to understand your own value, then how on earth will you ever be not just a great negotiator, but find happiness and fulfillment because you're putting yourself sort of behind everybody else, right? You're not allowing yourself to be as deserving as opportunities are given, as whether you're a mom, whether you're a student, whether you're seeking a new job or you're an executive, you matter. We matter. And I think that when they get that, like this notion of, okay, this is going to be taught to us in a very different way. But people also, I have the privilege of having these folks that listen and become really anchored almost immediately. And the classroom becomes sort of our safe haven.
I would, as I'm listening to you talking, I'm thinking these kids probably are thinking, I can't wait to get back to that class and learn more. This is so interesting. And what's fascinating is, and I'd love for you to talk about how it ties into negotiating, but the power, I think, for all of us is in our originality. And we live in a society that tells us this is how you do it. You know, here's the ABCs, how to look, how to speak, how to start a business, and we're always moving away from the original piece of who we are, which is where the wow comes from.
Right.
So why is that important in negotiating? So, for example, which is something we can talk about negotiating at high levels in a business, you know, two major corporations that are looking to merge, or negotiating with a family member. Why is it so important that when we're doing that, we're bringing, you know, we're just speaking as who we are? How does that affect the outcome?
A couple of ways. I think whether you're a big corporation or whether, again, you're negotiating with family members, you almost have to always understand your why, right? What's driving you to this conversation? What is it that you really want to get out of this conversation? What's most important to you? And I don't think you come to that without truly doing some self-reflection, or even as a company or whatever it is, to understand why these decisions are being made, because people get behind it better when they understand the why. And so I think that's the first piece of this. The other is that, again, there's many opinions about this, so I don't want anybody to think like this is the be all and end all. I always encourage my students and everybody else to read other books around negotiations and understand how this is taught by different professors and academics, because you have to find a way that's most authentic and genuine to you. But as far as I'm concerned, we perform best when we don't feel like we have to follow a particular formula. We perform best when we understand our own values, where we can abide by and honor our values, and that you're not trying to memorize things when you're having this conversation, that you feel quite confident, having prepared, obviously, but also speaking your voice, knowing that you don't have to pretend to be somebody else. You don't have to fear what you're wearing or how you're conducting yourself, because if you put all of your energy behind the pretense, right, who you're supposed to be, then who you are is sidelined. And I think when we are sort of under duress, or if the conversation becomes really sort of anxiety ridden, we find our best way forward when we can speak our own voice, not, oh, what did I read on page 148 of that book? How am I supposed to behave now? Our gut instincts are pretty strong. And the older we get, the more we trust ourselves. I think the better we are at navigating those situations. So being your authentic self sort of ends up saving the day, because it's your best, it's the best way to navigate this road. And whether it's contentious, whether it's really collaborative, who are you and what is it that you want? And be yourself.
I wanted to ask you this question. If you're in a situation where you are, you're negotiating for something, and you don't necessarily have certain facts and figures, but you know intuitively that this is the right thing, I guess, what kind of language can we use? Other than, I don't know that, but I'll find out and I'll get back to you, because I think often our intuition is the truth, and yet we might not have certain facts and figures that someone is asking for.
Right. So I don't want to sound like I'm sort of going against what I just said. Our intuition can be the truth, but we also all have biases and prejudice and stereotypes that we carry around with us. So we want to make sure that as we're making these decisions and coming into these conversations, that we're not just coming at it from a place of instinct, but also marrying that to information and data, and really understanding what it is that you're doing and why it is that you're doing that, right? So sometimes we don't know everything, but that's why I always say, like, keep an open mind, because the person sitting across from you may actually know things that will be of benefit to you, and you have to allow yourself, again, to continue learning through this process. And if you come to a point where something is being offered and you don't know the information, like you said, or the complete information, then I think it's always better to say, I just need a little time to reflect on this. We want to go through some of this information, and we will get back to you. Can we set up a time to come back to this again? So you're not saying I'm ignorant or unprepared. You're saying, I feel like that message is, I want to be more thoughtful. We want to be more thoughtful. And this is more valuable to us than sort of shooting from the hip. So let's take that time to reflect. Thank you for this information that you've given us. There's a lot to think about. We want to come back.
Yeah. Real quick, because we're running out of time, but I want to talk about your book and what the readers will find in it, and why you decided to write it. It's a big task.
It is.
And you didn't want to write the book, if I read correctly. You were
I did not.
I wanted to write this book.
I did not fancy myself to be an author. And thank God I was never under this illusion that this is going to be an easy thing, because it's not an easy thing at all. But it was very therapeutic in a lot of ways. It was quite cathartic. And what the book is really sort of a reflection of what I do in a classroom, which is, again, this notion of the first step is to better understand yourself and your own value. And then to bust a lot of myths around negotiations. Like, this isn't something that is only transactional. This is, in fact, something you do all the time. That a lot of these notions that we have about negotiations are really the things that hold us back. That learning to tell our story better is what's important. That this becomes really a sort of a conversation around relationships and connections, as opposed to one person versus another, and allowing people to feel like they should be their authentic self. Again, this could be a little controversial around negotiations, because you're like, well, I've been told not to be emotional, or not to show my true colors, or to talk less. I sort of go against the grain in a lot of those ways. And I wanted my book to be accessible. So it comes from a form of stories, and it feels like an autobiography in a lot of ways, but there's also stories of what happens in my classroom, or life experiences that I've had or seen my students have, because I feel like stories make it widely acceptable and seen, and it doesn't feel too academic. It doesn't feel like something that people have to reach for and may not get there. It says that everybody has their own story. Just learn how to tell it and come at it from a place where you value yourself first. And that's what I wanted the book to do is, I love the subject. I do. And I feel like everybody needs to learn how to do it better, because it's so much a part of our life. Mm. And that's how I wrote the book. And that's what the book really is. It's storytelling.
Yeah. Well, the last thing I want to ask you, because I'm just so curious, first of all, do you find yourself now in your life where you are fully going out into the world as yourself every day? And if not, are there still, because I think there's triggers, there's things that pull us back to perhaps that little girl that wasn't quite sure. What do you say to yourself in those moments to kind of bring you back to Mori?
I think how we grow up and what we're told as kids really matters. Words matter as you're sort of being raised in a household, and who you're around. And I think that in a lot of ways, I feel like I've disappointed people because I didn't become what they had imagined of me to become, that I didn't fulfill that promise of a career in medicine or whatever it is. And though that may seem silly to some people, it's sort of firmly embedded in my mind. And this notion of, well, if I don't succeed, it's, will they say, we told you so? And that's never really happened, but it's still sort of in your head. So failure is not an option. And the other part of that is that it affects the way you see yourself. And so imposter syndrome, or whatever people want to call it, is very, very real. Mm-hmm. And though I am feeling more confident by the day, because the more I lean into who I am, and allowing myself to sort of follow what is my purpose, what I'm so joyful about doing, the more it's like being able to breathe more comfortably, right? And standing in your own power, and how that's not a bad thing, but it's absolutely something you should allow yourself to do, and not at the risk of other people, but really at the benefit of yourself, because when you're better, you can do better. Yeah. And I think that while there's that constant push-pull, and it happens, I'll tell you a good example. When I'm being introduced and I hear all these, things being said about me, sometimes I'm like, oh my God, is that me? I mean, you still it's sort of still hard to kind of accept, because that's not the language that I use to describe myself a lot of times. And to hear it and make peace with that and say, well, it is you've accomplished these things.
Did those things. That's right. Yeah.
That ownership becomes more easily once you can look in that mirror and say, you have done this, you have accomplished this. And the better I get at doing that, I feel like the better I am in a classroom, in business, in my family. And so I think that for people that think, well, I can't see myself that way, you can. It's just a lot of work, and it's letting go of a lot of the scars, or making peace with your pieces, and dealing with those sort of demons, and doing that sort of emotional hygiene. And once you do, I feel like there's joy in that. There's purpose in that. There's peace in that.
There's breathing better. I love when you said that. I thought, gosh, that is so true. When you have peace of mind, you're breathing beautifully. When you're tense for whatever reason, you're holding your breath. That's not good.
No, it's like wearing something that you feel really comfortable wearing, or wearing something that you don't feel so comfortable wearing. It's like there's, what I mean? It's like,
the coat that doesn't fit. I thought that's such a great example. You're trying to be someone you're not. You're wearing a coat that doesn't fit. That's a great analogy, because you can feel that physically.
Yes.
I wish we had more time. I'm really appreciative of your coming on the show and talking so candidly about your work and your life. And I wish you continued success.
Thank you. It takes a good interviewer to be able to do that. So thank you for sort of allowing the conversation to go where it did.
Oh, thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day. Stay with us for our watch team, and I'll be right back.
From Philadelphia to the Lehigh Valley and everywhere in between. For 150 years, Penn Community Bank has been a part of your neighborhood. Helping businesses start, supporting families as they grow, and staying connected to the people and places that make this region special. It's who we are and where we're from. Penn Community Bank. Here we are, and here we grow.
Welcome back. Thank you so much for being with me for another week of Women to Watch. Stay tuned for my interview next week with Daria Burke. Daria is a global business advisor. She is a speaker and an author, and very much looking forward to having her on the show. As always, thank you to our sponsors, our watch team of corporate partners, and to Helm Creative for producing the show. Have a great week, everyone.
We are CHOP, and we can't wait to show you around. We're the nation's first children's hospital. Now, a care network with more than 50 locations that continues to expand. 3 state-of-the-art research buildings with 1.5 million square feet of space. We have grown from 12 beds 165 years ago to nearly 600 beds and one of the best children's hospitals in the world. We have a level 1 trauma center, 11 floors of patient units, more than 20 operating rooms, first of its kind delivery unit for babies with birth defects, a separate cardiac operative and catheterization suite, and places to learn, like our internationally recognized simulation center. We have trained generations of leaders in the field of pediatrics. We are world leaders in medicine, surgery, and science. One of the top recipients in NIH funding for pediatric research. In this building, pioneers in CAR T therapy, mitochondrial disease, brain tumors, hyperinsulinism, and other rare diseases. Here, groundbreaking work in fetal surgery, genetics and genomics, and neurology. In our newest building, leaders in social determinants of health, clinical informatics and epidemiology, autism, trauma and injury prevention. Our patients come from every state and 115 countries. Meeting these challenges requires the best and the brightest. We are passionate about pediatrics. We are motivated to make a difference in the world and in our community. We are a team. We are CHOP.
Stream on a Roku, a Fire Stick, Google TV, or Apple TV? Now you can watch 6ABC 24/7 with the 6ABC Philadelphia streaming app. Watch Action News live.
And the big story on Action News.
Plus special programming, breaking news, and severe weather updates.
Tremendous amounts of rain.
Always on. Always the news team you trust. Watch 6ABC 24/7 on your streaming device. Search 6ABC Philadelphia and start streaming today.